If you create an account and start putting some bets up, there's a fair chance that your friends that like to bet with you are going to come over to Dabble as well to see what you're doing and to leave a comment and tell you how bad you are at tipping when you get it wrong and maybe giving you a thumbs up reaction when you get it right.
Hey, this is Jesse here, and you're about to hear episode 125 with Jon Robin from Dabble, which is the future of sports gaming. In this one, Jon talks with guest host Benjie Cherniak about the unique social betting experience that differentiates Dabble in the crowded Australian market, the background story on the $30 million strategic investment that Dabble received from Tabcorp, Dabble's recent expansion into the US market, and Jon's foray into investing to support the next generation of entrepreneurs within our space. Dabble is a fascinating business, and Jon was an awesome guest, so I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 4 out of the top 5 US operators personalize player experiences with Optimove. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/bettingstartups. If you like what you see, you'll get your first month free. All right, we are back with episode 125 of the Betting Startups podcast, and it's been a little while, but for this one, we're super excited to welcome back friend of the podcast, Benjie Cherniak, as guest host. Benjie, you and I actually caught up in person last week during your stopover on Vancouver Island, where I live, so it was great to catch up with you as always, but for the benefit of the audience who hasn't heard you on the pod for about 6 months now, maybe you can give us a quick update on what's new and exciting in your world.
Before I even do that, I'll just give a quick plug to Vancouver Island, or to Victoria rather, to the island. If any of you listening, be it entrepreneurs, investors, or other, make your way out there, definitely hit up our guy, Jesse. Great host. We had a great lunch out there. It's a beautiful place to spend an afternoon or a day or a few days. So would highly encourage everyone listening to make their way down. If they're visiting Vancouver, take a day, maybe head over and say hello to Jesse. Don't leave him hanging. Putting that one aside, in terms of what I'm up to, a few new things on my plate, as I'd mentioned to you. I'm officially joined the board of Kambi, which is a global platform provider. So spending some time with those guys back and forth from Europe. We've recently announced a new CEO there, so some really exciting things with them. As I mentioned to you, some of the companies that I'm involved with have either exited or nearing exit, which is great for all of the entrepreneurs listening. A company that I was involved with called Zero Flux was recently acquired by Caesars Entertainment, which is a great result for that founder. And continuing to evaluate new companies and new opportunities. So just keeping generally busy. I mentioned to you, I'm doing some consulting with the Full Pull Group and Chase Richardson. So that's been a lot of fun and something really different for me. So yeah, keeping my hands on a bunch of different projects.
Awesome. Well, appreciate the shout out for Victoria there, Tourism Vancouver Island. Thanks you for that. And a quick shout out as well to Steve Gray from Zero Flux. As you mentioned, he was formerly on the podcast probably about a year ago, an Australian, which also is a nice segue into talking about this episode we're about to preview, which is with another Australian, which is Jon from Dabble. And as you know, Benjie, this is an episode we've been trying to put together for some time now. Dabble, of course, has quickly established itself as an innovative sportsbook in its home market of Australia, and more recently has cemented itself as a player in the DFS space here in North America. So, as always, it'd be great if you could tee this one up for us and give the audience a quick preview of your discussion with Jon.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I've known Jon a couple of years now, and probably one of the first people he met on the North American side in our space when he was made his way down to a conference in Toronto a couple of years back. And he's a great dude. They've got a great company. They've managed to open up a B2C sports book in a crowded Australian market and via a really innovative product, carve out market share. And we say product is king. And for them, it has been. They just built out some really innovative tools as pertains to social. And as we know, Jesse, it's very difficult to find that sweet spot between real money gaming and social and how they interact. These guys have seemed to found something that's working for them. And in the early going, it looks like they've replicated that in the US on the pick side. So sky's the limit for these guys. It was great to spend some time with Jon and hear what they have planned and hear what they've been doing and hear some of the little snippets of the secret sauce to their success.
Awesome. Well, it was great to see you last week, Benjie. Another great episode with you in the host seat. And we do appreciate, as always, you stepping in to help out and give me a week off. So with that, let's get into the episode with you and Jon from Dabble.
Hi, everyone. This is Benjie Cherniak sitting in for Jesse.
I'm once again guest hosting. Great to be back here on the Betting Startups podcast, and super excited to be hosting today. In particular, got a guest with us here today, Jon Robin from Dabble, who I've been trying to get on the podcast for a little while now to hear his story. Jon, we finally got you. Calendars are synced. Welcome to the pod.
Thanks, Benjie. Great to be here. And thanks to Jesse for having me. Big fan of the show.
Love it. And I know we got you like on a layover at an airport on your way to Summit in Tallinn, Estonia. So we're going to maximize our time with you over here. But maybe for the benefit of our users, obviously you're from Australia and doing some interesting things in the US. But to back up before we get into Dabble, maybe a bit about you, your background, and how that led you to coming to Dabble, so to speak.
Yeah, sure. My background story is a bit of a typical tragic entrepreneur story. I was always playing around with side hustles from high school, and a couple of them with my brother, Dave, who we went on to found Dabble together. So, rich dad, poor dad, read that at 17 or 18. And yeah, I was always trying and buying and selling things off eBay or setting up Facebook pages to run affiliate marketing, which was the eventual bridge into starting Dabble. Yeah, I tried the real corporate world as well, tried the accounting job. That one didn't quite work out, and yeah, I think it was destiny that I'd end up starting something with Dave, and that's ultimately what happened in 2020.
Destiny indeed, and we get to 2020, keeping it all in the family to get Dabble going. But we look at Dabble now and all of the social elements of Dabble and front and center, but what was the thesis? What led you and Dave to start Dabble? What led you to believe that there was room within the Australian ecosystem for another sportsbook startup to come in and achieve meaningful market share? And, what was the entire thought process that went into that?
That sort of 3 years or so, Dave and I were working in the industry or adjacent to the industry through our affiliate marketing business. And we worked with a lot of sportsbooks in Australia, a few in the UK, a couple in the US. So we were sort of getting a feel for the global sports betting landscape. And ultimately we felt like from a user's perspective that the experience was still very transactional, it was still very one-to-one. And if you think back to the origins of sports betting, like in Australia and the UK, it's the horse racing, at the track, you'd go up to your bookie, you'd give them some money, they'd give you a ticket, and if it won, you'd go back to collect your winnings. And, the Vegas sports book, similar experience, very transactional, very one-on-one, and feels like a one-player game. We were at the same time in these environments on social media, like Facebook groups and Instagram pages and TikTok channels, seeing that people wanted to be talking about their betting experiences. They wanted to be engaging, they wanted to be interacting and connecting with other people at the same time as having a bet, because that traditional transactional experience, it might suit the more hardcore sports bettor, but if it's the customer that's just doing it for fun or for the entertainment or for the love of the sport and to have a bit of skin in the game, they were looking for a more recreational and more fun and a more entertaining experience. And that's why they were taking these transactional experiences to other platforms like Facebook to talk about them. And we just thought there needed to be a place that you could do both of those things at the same time. So place the bet and also find people to talk to about the bet, or find other people that are betting on similar things or different things, or, find people to follow and to have fun with. So that was the thesis for Dabble.
Yeah, and that's interesting because you guys have done a really good job of kind of threading that needle and finding that intersection between social and the betting component of it. But 2020 isn't that long ago, but if you think back to those early days, what was it like getting this thing started? How long did it take for you guys to start building momentum and traction? Obviously, you spoke to your background in affiliate marketing, and you guys have some strength in the user acquisition side, but maybe talk to me a bit about those early days as you were getting going.
Yeah, it all happened pretty quickly in 2020. When that first COVID lockdown hit, the business that we were working on, we lost a large client when the Stars Group and Flutter merged, and they decided to just run the one brand in Australia. It meant that our client BetEasy was getting dismantled, and we was sort of at a pivot point. This all snowballed within a few weeks that we ultimately decided to take what we'd built up over those last few years and parlay it into a into our own app. And first sort of few months during the COVID lockdowns was pretty tough time to be launching a business, but at the same time it was a great time in hindsight to be recruiting great people remotely and not being reliant on physical presences in offices. We could just find the talent that was best suited to help us, and it also meant most people were stuck at home, so we were all working pretty hard to get the thing off the ground. And that first, I'd say, 9 months or so was a real focus on product development, sketching out what the vision was for that app and seeing what was realistic to get in that first version of the app. So yeah, those early days were a real grind, real tech focus. We'd made a decision with our third co-founder, our CTO, to build everything in-house, which was I certainly wasn't aware of how big of a decision that was at the time, but it's paying dividends for us 4 years later, that's for sure.
Yeah, no question that, I think part of the key to your success, you talk about your product and your proprietary technology. Another key to your success has been, look, obviously you guys have done a good job as it comes to raising capital. We'll talk about that shortly. You've done an interesting job as it pertains to some of the expansion into the US. We'll talk about that as well. But one of the things that I've always felt you guys are good at is the user acquisition piece. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that at all. Obviously, you can't spill secret sauce, so to speak, but what is kind of your key to marketing, growing your user base that you've done a really good job with?
Yeah, we come from an affiliate background, so it starts with affiliates and finding the right partnerships to help sort of put fuel on that fire. We're very big on the affiliates and marketing partners, influencers, all those sorts of areas to find people to help us grow the brand and spread the word. Early days in Australia, the affiliate business that Dave and I were running had built up a fairly sizable audience that we were able to leverage, so that certainly helped us get off the ground. And then from that base of affiliates and finding the right marketing partners, it's all about just leveraging the social features that are in the app and the way that they can help drive advocacy through our customers, and hopefully have the best form of marketing is when your customers do it for you, when they tell their friends and you get the organic referrals. So that was certainly a big part of the thesis with the social product is, Benjie, if you create an account and start putting some bets up, there's a fair chance that your friends that like to bet with you are going to come over to Dabble as well to see what you're doing and to leave a comment and tell you how bad you are at tipping when you get it wrong, and maybe giving you a thumbs up reaction when you get it right.
That's really cool. And, you have done that. It's an incredible flywheel, as you allude to, because a lot of the marketing becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of your users who love the product and are engaging with other users and their friends getting involved in that engagement. It snowballs and continues to snowball. And for you guys, it's continuing to snowball. And, around the time that I met you, I think it was at a conference in Toronto, maybe it was 2021, I'm not even sure when it was, but it was a couple of years back. And shortly thereafter, you guys had already established a nice foothold in Australia, some pretty good growth. And shortly thereafter, you guys brought in Tabcorp as an investor and a partner in your business on what was publicized in a fairly sizable transaction for their involvement. Some who may not be as familiar with Tabcorp, if you could tell us who they are, how all this came to be, why it made sense for you to have, in effect, Australia's biggest sportsbook as an investor in your business and a partner to you.
Yeah, it was certainly a large transaction, a lot of a big process that involved a lot of due diligence, but not just on the Tabcorp side. We'd set out to raise a Series A earlier in the year, so we'd already been through a bit of a process, started a conversation with Tabcorp, and that ultimately was the transaction that ensued. And as you alluded to, they invested 30 million Australian dollars or 20 million US dollars to buy a 20% stake in Dabble. And the strategic alignment was pretty obvious from the first meeting, to be honest. As you mentioned, they're the biggest wagering operator in Australia. They always have been. They've got a dominant retail presence. They have effectively a retail monopoly in Australia. They are big in the racing scene. At the racetrack, it's always a TAB that you go up to, and they have retail outlets, and they're in pubs and clubs. They're very much the incumbent of the Australian wagering scene. And when you think about it, a lot of those experiences that I've just described at the racetrack, in the retail outlet, at the pub, a lot of them are social by nature in an offline sense. And Tabcorp do also have an online business, a digital business, and they've really carved out a really strong position in the older demographic, the people that grew up going to races, going to the pub, going to retail outlets and betting with the tab, and they have a dominance in this sort of 45, 50, 55, 60 age category, as well as a presence across the board. But the fit for Dabble was pretty clear in that our product was resonating with the younger age demographic, the more 18 to 35-year-old customer, and there was a bit of a fit both ways in that we could learn something from Tabcorp in their experience in growing the biggest brand in the country, and that they could learn something from us in getting this cut through in the up and coming and the next generation of punters. So yeah, I guess that's Tabcorp as a whole, and they led that most of that round, that Series A. They were the very large majority of that transaction.
Look, a lot of the folks who listen to this podcast are other entrepreneurs with startups in our space. And, I don't need to tell you, in fact, you've invested in some deals, but as you know, raising capital is not an easy endeavor for most folks in our space. And it almost seems like you guys have made it look easier than it should be, which I guess is a good thing. But, maybe you could speak a little bit to the fundraising process, how you, your brother, your co-founders, your CTO have approached that process, what you look for, and how your investors have helped you get to where you are and support you in your process.
Fundraising, I think the golden rule is always to start early, and I'm pretty sure you told me that in 2022 when we met in Toronto, and I was trying to meet potential partners because we had the Series A live at that point in time. You were definitely one of the people that said you've got to build relationships over time. Like you can't just rock up with an open checkbook expecting them to sign. And that was advice that we've certainly received along the journey, but it takes a while for that to really set in and to truly appreciate that. I think I've got to that point now that I do truly appreciate that. And it actually works both ways. It's not just that you, Benjie, as a potential investor, want to know a bit about Dabble before you jump in, and you'd prefer to follow along for a bit before you get out the checkbook. But it's also from Dabble's side. Like, we'd prefer to know a little bit about you, get to know each other, see what you're like as a partner to work with, see what benefits you can bring to the cap table. And ultimately, the fit does need to go in both directions. And I think that's been the biggest learning over the years, is that it will always take longer than you hope it should and think it could. But ultimately, the longer you take to do it, the better position you're going to be in, not only from a potential terms like raise amount and valuation, but also the partners that you bring on. And it's a pretty big commitment, this partnership. Like you're really getting into bed and promising yourself to each other for a very long period of time. So you want to be sure of it. And thankfully, it's worked out pretty well for Dabble so far. We've had great partners on board.
Yeah, I guess it was 2022 when we met, which really isn't that long ago. And you guys have made some significant strides since then, most notably expansion into the US via the Dabble offering. So, I'd love if you could tell our audience a little bit about the thought process and quote unquote coming to America. We've seen some European and other outfits from across the globe making their way to the US and taking their ball and going home in some capacity. No shortage of examples of companies who have done that, including some sports books that have come from Australia. And here you guys are and have made your way into the US, and seemingly with the direction you've chosen have made some pretty good traction. So I'd love to hear a bit about that journey, your overall thought process collectively in making that decision and where you are now.
Yeah, it was only 2 years ago. That 2 years is a very long time in this space, as you know, Benjie, especially in North America. A month is a long time, let alone 2 years. And
we age in dog years in our industry. A year is 7 years, so there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, Dabble's only been around for 4 years, so 2 years is half of our existence. And I've definitely aged closer to the 28 years than 4 mentally and physically. But the US was always part of the plan, or was always something that we wanted to consider from the very first moment that we'd thought about Dabble. It wasn't just a local play, it was always going to be global, and North America was an obvious potential to consider. We had companies like PointsBet and Bluebet and PlayUp that were coming across from Australia at the time, as well as all the European entrants that you mentioned, and some of these big US companies that had a war chest to get themselves into the fight as well. So we'd always knew that it was part of the plan. 2021 and 2022, we weren't ready to come across. The product wasn't ready. As I mentioned, we built it all in-house. So anything that we wanted to launch with, we were committed to building that ourselves. And during that time, we were just watching the market unfold and seeing that it was expensive to get in through market access or licensing deals, expensive to acquire customers through marketing and particularly brand spend and these generosity wars. And also it was a pretty slow rollout in that you had to go on a state-by-state basis. And partially put it down to us being patient and watching that unfold. The truth is that we probably couldn't have gone in because we weren't ready to anyway, but I would say it was just patience sitting on the sidelines. But by the time 2023 rolled around, and keeping in mind we launched the Australian business almost 3 years ago to the date, so July 2020. So by the time July 2023 rolled around and we'd been live in Australia for 2 years, we felt we were ready to make that international step. We'd seen this competitive landscape in the US get more and more competitive and expensive and harder to turn that into a profitable business, while we also were seeing some of the adjacent categories like daily fantasy sports going through a new evolution of games that were really engaging these customers, especially in the pre-regulated states where they couldn't access online sports betting or iGaming, like California and Texas, Florida, Georgia, these big states that didn't yet have regulated sports betting. There were some of these challenger brands like PrizePicks and Underdog and Betr and Sleeper were really making a splash. And with this gameplay that we thought we could bring our product experience to, with the social interactions and the social media based inspiration on the follow and the copy and the comment to the daily fantasy sports game, which ultimately is what we went on to do. It was, once we'd made the strategic pivot to roll out our product in the US in that form, we got to work and we were ready to go by October last year when we launched the app.
Obviously, you've been quarterbacking the US piece, both physically in terms of moving here and visibly in terms of how you presented the opportunity as you come across and met with everyone in the ecosystem in this part of the pond. What to you are the biggest differences or challenges as you look at building your business in Australia versus building your business in the US? Are there differences, different approaches? How would you categorize that?
Yeah, there are two things that come to mind, and this naturally consumed a lot of conversation in 2021, 2022, 2023 when we were considering the expansion. The two things that come to mind are the education or awareness of sports betting and other wagering related products, and then the cultural side. So how different is the American consumer to the Australian consumer? On the cultural side, I would say we probably overestimated the difference. It's turned out that, and it sounds pretty obvious when you go back and say it in hindsight, but it turns out that sports fans who love watching these games on TV, on social media, sports fans also like having a bit of skin in the game. They like putting some of their money down to increase their buy-in and increase the engagement. And really, at the fundamental basis there, that's a pretty big similarity. We all speak English, we all watch pretty similar sports, and we all like to have fun and be engaged through putting some of our own money on online. And I think that carried a lot more than we thought it would culturally. So the cultural difference has not been as great as we expected. And I'd say on the education and the awareness side, we probably underestimated how developed the landscape would be in the US. Maybe some assumptions about, if they love sport, then they'll pick up wagering pretty quickly. But as you spent a lot of time in the US, Benjie, the last 15 or so years, the PASPA only was repealed in 2018. So it really is only the last few years that betting and even daily fantasy sports has gone to the masses, has gone widespread. And, we're now seeing partnerships between FanDuel and DraftKings with big leagues like the NBA and the WNBA and the NFL, and big teams and big stadiums. And that is now starting to flow down to the mass adoption part of the curve of everyday consumers being aware of this space and these products, but they really weren't probably until 2018, 2019 at the mass adoption and awareness level. And that's flowed through in the way that we bring our product across, because every Australian knows what sports betting is. They grew up with it. We're the biggest gamblers per capita in the world. Very heavy and strong adoption, awareness and education and trust around this industry. In the US, super early on, super underdeveloped and underestimated by us. And it just means that you need to keep your messaging really simple, and you need to focus on educating your customers at the same time as trying to convince them that this gameplay will be fun for them.
Yeah, and the education part is interesting. You spoke a bit earlier about Tabcorp and their involvement with you guys, about your demographic being perhaps a more youthful demographic, the 18 to 35 markets versus maybe, the more established betting operators are targeting maybe a more mature demographic. How do you view that as you look at the US or even the global opportunity in terms of how, the different habits of that next generation of punters? And we look at companies like yourself, arguably a company like Better and others that are trying to zone in a little bit more on that TikTok generation and that social media driven generation versus the established Better and the way that they've always done things in the past. How do you view that convergence as it relates to what you're trying to do, be it globally or in the US market?
Yeah, it's probably unfolded relatively naturally just by the nature of the fact that we started our business in 2020. We took a lot of our inspiration in designing features and designing user experiences from other social media applications. Like we were looking at Twitter and Instagram and TikTok at the same time, or even before we were looking at some of the incumbent sports books or existing brands from a wagering transactional experience. And that just flows through in what you see on our app. I think that Better would be similar. They launched around a similar time, and some of these challenger brands, we have taken our inspiration from user experiences that are already working in other categories. And whether it is straight social media or other industries that are adopted social media based practices and principles in the way that they roll out their user experiences as well, it's proving to be really powerful with that next generation who have grown up using Instagram and TikTok and Twitter, and they haven't grown up going to the racetrack or getting the form guide out of the newspaper or doing their own research on sports betting lines and then going down to the Vegas casinos. And when you compare that to some of the larger operators and the incumbents that have been around for a lot longer than us, they built their user experiences back in 2000, 2005, 2010, when mobile apps weren't really a thing. TikTok probably didn't exist. And I think you can see that when you pick one up and compare it to the other and you sign up on board and start trying to play around Dabble and our peers, it feels more like it was built in the last couple of years, and some of the larger competitors and that have been around for a lot longer, it feels a bit more like you're picking up an Excel spreadsheet or a newspaper.
One thing I've gotten to know about you is that you and your partners are usually a few steps ahead on the chessboard and looking a little further down the field even before you get there. And you allude to that when you began the process of speaking with investors and planning out the US market. And you've been very methodical in how you've done that. And by all accounts, look, we all know you've achieved some great success in Australia. It sounds like you're doing some pretty interesting things, and it sounds like you're doing some really interesting numbers out of the gate in the US. Of course, only 1 year in and one football season in, and still a long way to go. What comes next for you guys, to the extent that you can talk about it, be it in the US, be it in Australia? You're going to continue to grow. Do you have plans beyond that in other markets or in other verticals within those same markets?
Yeah, we have deliberately taken that methodical approach. And I think for the most part, it comes down to the partners that you have on Tabcorp, as you mentioned, and YOLO Group, our second biggest investor and shareholder. They're incredibly supportive of the journey that we're on and in it for the long term. So it means that if next year or next month or next quarter isn't the right time to roll out the next move, then we're happy waiting and pushing it back. And that was shown with the US. We probably could have realistically had something live in 2022 if we really wanted to. It ended up being later in 2023 that we did release it. I think that was the right decision and paid dividends for us. So that will certainly continue to play out over the next few years, where we're always looking at opportunities. Myself and Dave, my brother and co-founder in particular, we spend a lot of our time trying to look forward that 3 to 5 year sort of time span and think about what are the decisions that we can make now to place ourselves as best as we can when that comes around. And that might be things like, at the moment, we are in every feature that we build or every change that we make to our platform, we're thinking about what does this look like if we want to offer this experience in more countries, in more markets at some point in the future. And being aware of that now means that when it comes to it in a year or two, we're going to be in a good position to do so, rather than rushing it and maybe tacking something on and not doing it in the best way that might come back to bite you later. So that's the approach. In terms of where that takes us, we've always had the global mindset for Dabble. Our core founding vision was to revolutionize the sports betting experience and to take it to as many customers as we can in as many parts of the world as we can. That's complicated by regulatory hurdles that we need to continue to work through, but that's ultimately still the end game, and our vision is to put this user experience that we think can rival any other sports betting user experience in the world and take it to as many customers as we possibly can. So that will include more global markets. Like, don't be surprised if you see Dabble in any combination of the UK, Europe, Brazil, other LATAM, Asia in 10 years' time. I don't know necessarily the next one or two, but that's certainly the longer term piece.
You just named a lot of countries there. So for those of you listening from across the pond, you did mention it could be over the next decade as opposed to the next 6 months to a year. But for those listening across the pond, Dabble could be coming to a theater near you at some point in the future. You spoke a bit earlier when in your early days, even prior to Dabble, how you were sort of an entrepreneurial mindset and always involved in a bunch of different entrepreneurial things. And I've noticed that in the last year or two, you yourself, in a bit of your spare time, have been dabbling, so to speak, pardon the pun, in a bit of investing in companies here and there within our space, which is welcome to me as somebody who also writes checks in the space to see you participating in some capacity. Any thought process there? Any thoughts as to interesting segments to be investing in right now?
Yeah, you're one of the first people I met when I moved to North America, Benjie, in that conference in Canada, and seeing what you were doing, having been in the industry for 15 or 20 years, exiting it in terms of your company, but then getting back into it and giving back to the communities, the next generation of startups, and working alongside as advisor and investor. It truly is inspirational watching your journey. And I think from my perspective, even though I'm a lot earlier on and still heavily involved in Dabble and certainly by no means near an exit, I want to learn. I want to continue to learn and to meet new people and to see how other people run their businesses and to see what other new product innovations, marketing innovations, or just general business strategy is being taken up in the space. And I also want to give back where I can as well, whether that's financially, like not writing huge checks, but if I can come in as an angel in a seed round, or if I can sit down like this and speak to some founders and aspiring entrepreneurs, then I enjoy it, as I know that you do, and why you spend so much of your time just as much as a passion project as it is an ROI-based endeavor. So yeah, a little bit earlier on in the journey than you, Benjie, but I think some of the same values and beliefs and principles as to how I approach business myself and what I want to sort of be able to pass on to other people.
Yeah, well, I can say it's great to see you doing some of that stuff, and given the traction that you and your partners have achieved in Dabble in a very short period of time, obviously you guys know what you're doing and have a lot to give back, and continue to do that over the years, and a lot to teach us as much as the industry teaches you. Kind of in closing up here, we're nearing the end and wrapping up. When I met you, we spoke about it in Canada. I was in Toronto at that conference, and then later that summer, I was spending some time in Vancouver. I'm actually in Vancouver, British Columbia right now, by the way. And I know that you have an affinity to this city, spend some time here. I think your offices now for Dabble US are set up in Austin, Texas. So you've kind of been spending time. The two main cities in North America you've lived in are Vancouver and Austin. Which is the better city, pluses and minuses of both?
Oh, you don't make me choose. It's like choosing between children. It's interesting when you're an Australian moving over to North America, and not just me personally, but the company. You don't have any ties. You don't have any affinities. You don't have a town that you grew up in, or a city that you went to college in, or even a sports team that you follow. So it was not too dissimilar to getting up a map of the world and throwing darts at it. It ultimately came down to the cities that provided the best combination of accessibility from Australia was important, the tech scene and the startup scene, the landscape with regards to sports betting and daily fantasy sports. So, there's a few on the short list, and ultimately we ended up choosing to launch in Austin. Austin, I think it's a good landing spot for Australians. It's very warm, which is nice, feels like home. It's pretty laid back, the Texas culture, and also it's not too big. It's not too overwhelming for us Australian folk jumping across the pond. It's a couple of million people, not like the busy city lights of New York or Boston. And from a personal perspective, I think Vancouver is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, especially in summer. And I've noticed that you conveniently time your trips to Vancouver over the summer few months, Benjie. I'm sure that's deliberate. It's an incredible city, from the mountains to the beach within a couple of hours. I'm pretty happy with Austin, but I love visiting Vancouver when I can as well.
Well, there you have it. I think we'll wrap up on that segment there. Jon, I got to say it's been a pleasure both spending time with you here today and kind of getting to know you and your team over your journey the last couple of years, and wishing you the best of success moving forward, and look forward to seeing and hearing big things from Dabbles in the days, week, months, and years ahead. And we'll wrap up on that note.
Sounds good. Thanks, Benjie. Appreciate you setting this up, and thanks again to Jesse and Thomas as well.
The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 4 out of the top 5 US operators personalize player experiences with Optimove. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/bettingstartups. And if you like what you see, you'll get your first month free.